Every summer for 12 years, my parents sent me away to my aunt's cramped and unair-conditioned house in Baltimore, so my brother could have the perfect picture, perfect family vacations in Martha's Vineyard. The day I got my college diploma, I was already unpacked in another state. They just did not know which one. It took them 6 years to find me, and when they finally did, they had no idea that the woman sitting across from them was no longer the discarded daughter they used to hide from their elite social circle. My name is Sienna. I am 33 years old, and the final nail in my family's coffin began over a bowl of lobster bisque. I was enjoying a quiet Friday evening dinner at a five-star coastal restaurant, savoring the peaceful ambience. The jazz band was playing a soft melody in the corner. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow across the dining room, and I was just about to taste my appetizer when a shadow suddenly fell across my table. I did not even have time to look up before a folded piece of paper fluttered down and landed directly in the center of my soup bowl, splashing the rich cream onto the pristine white tablecloth. I stared at the ruined food, then slowly raised my eyes. The air in my lungs vanished. Standing over my table were the ghosts I had spent 6 years trying to forget. My mother Valerie stood there wearing her signature pearls, her lips pursed in that familiar expression of profound irritation she reserved only for me. Beside her was my father Charles, his jaw tight as his eyes immediately darted to my thick natural hair, an aesthetic choice he had always deemed unacceptable for his respectable image. Looming behind them was my older brother Julian, the golden boy of the family, smirking down at me. Clinging to his arm was his wife Courtney, a woman who practically radiated the kind of arrogant entitlement that only old money and white privilege could buy. "Slide the keycard over, Sienna," my mother commanded, her voice slicing through the elegant jazz music playing in the background. Julian and Courtney need the presidential villa for their vow renewal, and the front desk claims it is fully booked. She did not say hello. She did not ask where I had been for the last 6 years, how I had survived, or if I was even happy. Her very first instinct upon tracking down her estranged daughter was to issue a demand. I looked down at the paper floating in my soup. It was a check for $500. "We finally tracked you down after 6 years of you playing this ridiculous disappearing act," my father added, his tone dripping with disdain as he looked me up and down. "We do not care whose bed you are warming to afford a night at a luxury resort like this, but your presence here is an embarrassment to this family. Pack your bags immediately. Julian's in-laws are arriving tomorrow morning and they expect the absolute best. You being here simply does not fit the picture." The words hit me exactly as they had when I was a child. I remembered being 12 years old, watching my parents load their luggage into the car for a month-long trip to the Hamptons. I had begged to go, promising I would be on my best behavior. My mother had simply handed me a bus ticket to Baltimore, explaining that my darker skin and quiet demeanor just did not fit the vibrant, affluent family image they needed to project at the country club. They were the prominent black elite, the pride of their social circles, and I was the awkward blemish they chose to sweep under the rug. All those years I swallowed the pain of being erased so they could shine in their exclusive Jack and Jill chapters and high society banquets. I reached into my ruined soup with 2 fingers and pulled out the soaking wet check. I held it up, letting the bisque drip onto the table. "I am not taking your $500, Mom," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "And I am definitely not leaving the penthouse suite." Julian let out a loud, mocking laugh, shaking his head. "Come on, Sienna, do not do this right now. You know you cannot afford to stay in a place like this anyway. Take the money, go find a cheap motel in the city, and let the adults handle the real estate. You always were too difficult for your own good." Before I could respond, Courtney stepped forward, rolling her eyes with theatrical exhaustion. She crossed her arms, her massive diamond engagement ring catching the light from the chandeliers overhead. "Listen to me, Sienna," she sighed, her tone dripping with the kind of condescension that made my blood boil. "My father, Senator Sterling, is paying for this entire weekend. He is a very powerful man and he expects this venue to be perfect for our anniversary. If you do not leave quietly right now, I will personally have the security team drag you out of here. You do not belong in a place like this and you know it." I looked at Courtney, taking in her smug, satisfied expression. She was so incredibly confident in her power, so certain that her tears and her status would force me to bow my head and scurry away into the shadows, just like my parents had always forced me to do. But I was no longer the scared little girl they had shipped off to Baltimore. I was a woman who had built an empire in the dark, while they were busy polishing their fake crowns in the light. Without breaking eye contact with my sister-in-law, I deliberately placed my thumbs on the edges of the wet check and tore it straight down the middle. I tore it again, letting the soggy pieces fall onto the bread plate. Courtney gasped loudly, her hand flying to her chest in exaggerated shock. Charles stepped forward, his face turning an angry shade of purple, but Courtney was already raising her hand high in the air, snapping her fingers aggressively to get the attention of the restaurant staff. "Waiter," she practically screamed across the dining room. "Waiter, get your manager out here right now. This woman is harassing us, and I want her thrown off the property immediately." The clinking of silverware and the soft hum of conversation in the dining room ground to a halt. Every eye in the five-star restaurant snapped toward our table. Courtney let out a breathless, dramatic sob, her hands trembling as she clutched Julian's arm. It was a masterful performance, an instant weaponization of her tears, designed to paint me as the dangerous, aggressive black woman attacking the fragile, innocent white victim. She quickly shrank back, looking around at the wealthy patrons with wide, frightened eyes, ensuring everyone saw her distress. Julian puffed out his chest, stepping protectively in front of his wife while glaring down at me. My mother Valerie looked like she was about to have a stroke. She frantically smoothed down the front of her designer dress, her eyes darting around the room in absolute horror. The pristine, highly manicured image she had spent decades cultivating among the Atlanta elite was crumbling in front of her very eyes, and she immediately knew exactly who to blame. "Are you insane?" Valerie hissed, leaning across the table, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for me. "You have been a jealous, bitter embarrassment since the day you were born. Your brother is celebrating a huge milestone with a wonderful woman of true pedigree, and you maliciously decide to stalk us and ruin it. You just could not possibly stand to see him incredibly happy, could you?" I looked at my mother, marveling at her complete delusion. I had not sought them out tonight. I had been eating my beautiful dinner in utter peace before they violently invaded my personal space. Yet in her twisted mind, I was the horrible villain. I always was the villain. My father stepped much closer. His rigid jaw clenched so tightly, a thick blue vein visibly throbbed near his sweating temple. "This is exactly why we sent you away every single summer," Charles muttered, his deep voice dripping with absolute disgust. "You severely lack grace. You totally lack class. You possess these deep-seated behavioral issues, and you constantly bring down the respected family name. You will apologize to Courtney right this very second, or I swear to God, Sienna, I will permanently make sure you never again show your ugly face in our prestigious social circles." I slowly leaned back in my comfortable chair, crossing my legs elegantly, completely unbothered by their collective bubbling rage. "I have absolutely no desire to ever be part of your fake social circles, Charles," I said extremely calmly. Julian scoffed, wrapping an arm very tightly around Courtney, who was now delicately dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a soft silk tissue. "You are just so incredibly mad because you will never have what we have," Julian sneered. "You are a sad, lonely woman eating completely by yourself in a luxurious place you clearly do not belong. Just get your cheap purse and walk out the door before things get extremely ugly." Courtney sniffled loudly, pointing a freshly manicured finger directly at my stoic face. "She tore up our generous check, Julian." She looked at me with such unprovoked violence in her dark eyes. "I honestly feel deeply physically threatened right now. We desperately need to have her quickly arrested for intentional trespassing." I did not raise my steady voice. I did not even flinch. I just silently watched them confidently dig their shallow graves deeper, thoroughly savoring the absolute hilarious absurdity of the entire moment. The heavy mahogany oak doors of the grand dining room suddenly swung wide open, and the highly esteemed general manager hurried straight toward our tense table. Antoine was a meticulous, highly professional man from Paris, whom I had personally recruited 2 years ago. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his handsome expression a cold mask of serious authority as he approached the rapidly escalating scene. Courtney spotted him instantly and immediately latched firmly onto his left arm, her whining voice rising to a frantic, intensely trembling high pitch. "Thank goodness you are finally here," Courtney cried out, leaning heavily into Antoine as if he were her personal rescuing savior. "This awful woman is completely mentally unhinged. She is maliciously harassing my sweet husband and me, and she is stubbornly refusing to leave this reserved table. We are very important VIP guests. My wealthy father is Senator Sterling. I aggressively demand that you instantly call your security and have this dangerous, aggressive woman physically thrown out of the resort immediately. She is purposely making me feel incredibly terrified and unsafe." Antoine gently but extremely firmly removed his strong arm from Courtney's desperate, clutching grasp. He did not say a single solitary word to her. He did not apologize for the unpleasant inconvenience, nor did he signal for the burly security guards who were already standing silently by the front entrance. Instead, he confidently stepped completely past Courtney, smoothly walking around Julian, totally ignoring my speechless parents entirely, and stopped directly in front of my dining chair. Antoine stood perfectly tall, placed his right hand respectfully over his heart, and bowed very respectfully toward me. "Madam CEO," Antoine said, his rich voice carrying loudly and clearly across the suddenly dead silent dining room. "I deeply apologize for the unfortunate disturbance tonight. Would you like me to have these awful individuals permanently escorted off the private property?" Courtney's jaw dropped wide open in sheer disbelief. Julian froze completely solid, his tough, protective stance instantly crumbling into nothingness. My pale mother let out a loud, strangled, breathy gasp. "CEO!" Charles choked out loudly, staring blankly at Antoine, as if the composed man had just spoken in strange alien tongues. I smiled very sweetly, slowly picking up my heavy crystal water glass and taking a long, slow, refreshing sip before finally looking directly into Courtney's completely horrified, tear-filled blue eyes. "I am absolutely not a guest here, Courtney," I said, my voice smooth and chillingly calm. "I own this entire $80 million beautiful resort." The heavy silence that followed my declaration was absolute and profound. For several long seconds, the only sound in the entire grand dining room was the soft clinking of ice melting in my crystal water glass. My mother Valerie blinked rapidly, her perfectly arched eyebrows furrowing together as if her brain had simply short-circuited. My father Charles stared at my face, his rigid posture suddenly deflating. The sheer magnitude of my statement hung heavily in the tense air between us. I did not just work here. I did not just have a successful career. I owned the very ground they were standing on, the imported marble floors beneath their designer shoes and the sparkling crystal chandeliers hanging directly above their heads. Julian was the very first person to recover from the massive shock. His initial expression of complete horror slowly morphed into something entirely different. It was a look I knew incredibly well from our childhood. It was the look of calculating greed. He straightened his tailored suit jacket, a slow, incredibly smug smirk spreading across his handsome face. He looked down at his wife, gently patting her trembling hand. "Relax, Courtney," my brother chuckled, his deep voice dripping with arrogant amusement. "There is absolutely no need to be upset anymore. It turns out my little sister is actually going to be useful to the family name for once. We do not need to fight with the front desk about our room reservations. We have the owner sitting right here." My father instantly caught on to Julian's rapid pivot. The embarrassment and shock completely vanished from his stern face, instantly replaced by the overwhelming elitist entitlement that defined his entire existence. He puffed out his chest, stepping much closer to my table with a renewed sense of unearned authority. "Well then," Charles said, speaking to me in the exact same demanding tone he used when I was a helpless child. "This certainly changes the situation entirely. Antoine, was it?" My father snapped his fingers at the general manager, treating him like a lowly servant rather than a highly respected professional. "Since my daughter clearly owns this establishment, you will immediately upgrade us to the presidential villa. We expect complimentary champagne sent up right away. Make sure it is the vintage reserve. We also require a private cabana by the pool for the remainder of the weekend. Do not bother running my credit card. Put everything on my daughter's personal account." My mother let out a long, dramatic sigh of relief, instantly recovering her haughty demeanor. She reached up to adjust her expensive pearl necklace, looking around the luxurious restaurant with a newly appreciative eye. "I suppose this resort is marginally acceptable," Valerie stated, inspecting the fine linen tablecloths. "It is certainly not Martha's Vineyard, but it will have to do for Courtney's parents. Sienna, I expect you to personally greet Senator Sterling when he arrives tomorrow morning. You will dress appropriately, cover up that wild hair of yours, and behave with utmost respect. We are hosting very important people, and I absolutely will not allow you to embarrass us." I sat perfectly still, thoroughly fascinated by their relentless audacity. They had spent 12 years abandoning me in sweltering Baltimore summers because my dark skin did not match their elite social aesthetic. They had completely ignored my existence for 6 long years. They had just spent the last 10 minutes viciously insulting me, calling me a jealous embarrassment, and threatening to have me arrested. Yet the very second they realized I possessed immense wealth, they instantly demanded my resources as if they were unconditionally entitled to them. Antoine remained standing completely still beside my chair. He did not move a single muscle toward the front desk. He did not acknowledge my father's aggressive demands. He simply kept his calm, professional gaze fixed politely on my face, waiting patiently for my official instructions. I slowly placed my linen napkin on the table. "You must be incredibly confused, Charles," I said, my voice echoing sharply across the quiet room. "I am not your personal concierge. I am not your walking ATM. And I am certainly not funding your pathetic attempt to impress Courtney's family." Julian slammed his hands flat down on the table, leaning aggressively toward me. "Do not be ridiculous, Sienna. We are your family. You owe us this. You have clearly hoarded massive amounts of money while we have been busy maintaining the prestigious family image. Give us the keys to the villa right now." "You are absolutely right about one thing, Julian." I smiled coldly. "I do own the keys, and I am explicitly denying your stay. You are not getting the presidential villa. You are not getting a private cabana. In fact, you are not getting a single room in this entire resort." I turned my head slightly, looking up at my general manager. "Antoine, please bring these individuals their final bill." Antoine reached into his tailored suit jacket and seamlessly produced a black leather folder. He placed it directly in front of my seething father. Charles ripped the folder open, his dark eyes bulging out of his head. $2,000, Charles bellowed, his voice cracking with pure outrage. "For what? We have not even eaten anything yet. We just walked into the restaurant." "That is a standard disruption fee," I explained smoothly, taking another slow sip of my sparkling water. "You aggressively approached a VIP table uninvited. You maliciously harassed the resort owner. You caused a massive public scene that disturbed my paying guests. The $2,000 covers the strict penalty for violating our code of conduct. You will pay it immediately, and then you will pack your bags and vacate my property within the hour." Courtney's face contorted into unhinged fury. Her white privilege had never been blatantly rejected. She snatched her smartphone from her designer purse. "Yes, 911, I need police assistance immediately. A hostile woman is attacking us. Send officers now." Courtney dropped her smartphone onto the tablecloth, a vicious smile stretching across her pale face. She crossed her arms tightly, breathing heavily, in a manufactured display of terror. My mother patted Courtney's trembling shoulder while shooting me a look of pure venom. My father straightened his suit jacket, preparing his respectable voice for the authorities. Julian smirked, leaning back in his chair like a king watching a peasant about to be executed. They actually thought invoking the police would force me into submission. I remained in my chair, taking another sip of my sparkling water. Less than 5 minutes later, the dining room doors swung open. 2 uniformed police officers strode purposefully into the restaurant. The moment Courtney spotted the blue uniforms, her demeanor shifted with terrifying speed. The smug arrogance instantly vanished, replaced by a flawless performance of fragile victimhood. Genuine tears spilled rapidly down her flushed cheeks. She let out a loud, pathetic whimper and threw herself against Julian's chest. "Officers over here, please!" Courtney cried out, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "Thank God you are finally here. I was the one who called. This woman is completely out of control." The 2 officers approached our table quickly, their stern eyes locking onto my relaxed posture. The taller officer placed his hand on his radio. "Ma'am, we received an urgent call about a hostile disturbance and physical threats. What exactly is going on here?" "She is terrifying us," Courtney sobbed loudly, clutching her chest. "My husband and I are just trying to enjoy our peaceful anniversary dinner. This aggressive woman suddenly approached our private table and started viciously harassing us. She destroyed our personal property, demanded money, and wildly threatened to have her people physically attack me. I am so incredibly scared for my actual life right now." I did not interrupt her masterful, deeply racist performance. I just watched her weave a beautiful web of pure lies. The shorter officer looked directly at my father. "Sir, is this information accurate? Did this woman threaten your family?" This was the moment my parents could have chosen to do the right thing. Instead, Charles chose to completely sacrifice his biological daughter at the altar of white privilege. "Yes, officer, my daughter-in-law is telling the absolute truth," my father stated. "This woman is my estranged daughter, Sienna. She has a long documented history of severe behavioral issues and violent emotional outbursts. We were forced to cut ties with her 6 years ago because of her unstable nature. She maliciously followed us here to cause a dangerous scene. We strongly support Courtney's request to have her immediately arrested and permanently removed from the premises." My mother nodded vigorously, clutching her expensive pearls. "She is deeply troubled, officer. We have tried hard to help her over the years, but she is completely unhinged. Please, you must remove her before she violently hurts my sweet daughter-in-law." Julian puffed out his chest, stepping forward to block Courtney from my line of sight. "We are upstanding, wealthy citizens in this community. We do not feel physically safe with this unpredictable woman sitting near us. Arrest her right now for trespassing and making terroristic threats." The taller officer narrowed his eyes, turning his intimidating attention back to me. He took a heavy step forward. "Ma'am, I am going to need you to stand up slowly and step away from the table. You are officially being detained for trespassing and causing a public disturbance." I did not stand up. I did not raise my hands. I calmly placed my water glass down on the table and let out a soft chuckle. "I highly suggest you pause and evaluate the situation before you make a massive career-ending mistake, officer." "Officer," I said, my voice chillingly calm. The officer's face turned bright red with instant anger. "Excuse me, are you resisting a direct lawful order? Stand up right now, or I will be forced to physically remove you from this chair." "She is resisting!" Courtney shrieked from behind Julian's shoulder. "Arrest her! Put her in handcuffs!" From the dark shadows, Marcus, my head of private security, stepped forward. He wore a sharp black suit and moved with silent, lethal grace. Marcus walked past the stunned waitstaff, bypassed my confused family, and stopped next to the police officers. Marcus did not say a single word. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a silver tablet along with an official legal folder. He handed both items directly to the taller police officer. "What is this?" the officer demanded, looking down at the illuminated tablet screen. "That is the unedited, high-definition security footage from the camera positioned exactly 10 feet above this very table," I explained smoothly, leaning back in my chair. "It clearly shows with crystal-clear audio that I was eating my dinner completely alone and in total silence. It shows these 4 individuals aggressively invading my personal space. It shows my mother throwing a check into my food, and it perfectly captures Courtney initiating the harassment and falsely threatening to use her father's political power to have me dragged out." The officer's eyes widened as he tapped the screen, watching the crisp, perfectly clear video play out exactly as I had described. The audio of Courtney's condescending elitist threats echoed softly from the tablet's speakers. "And the folder?" the shorter officer asked, his aggressive tone suddenly dropping into something much more hesitant. "That folder contains the legally notarized property deed for this entire $80 million resort." I smiled coldly. "It proves I am the sole proprietor. I am not trespassing on private property. I own the property. The only people illegally trespassing are the 4 liars standing in front of you." The 2 uniformed police officers very slowly lowered the sleek tablet. The heavy tension they had previously directed at me instantly vanished. They slowly turned their heads, their expressions immediately hardening into masks of absolute furious glare as they locked their eyes directly onto Courtney's pale, trembling face. "Ma'am, do you have any idea what the strict legal penalty is for filing a deliberately false police report in this jurisdiction?" The taller officer asked, his voice low and incredibly dangerous. Courtney physically shrank back against my brother, her fabricated tears instantly drying up. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, high-pitched squeak escaped her trembling lips. The shorter officer stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. "You maliciously called emergency services, claiming you were being violently attacked and physically threatened," the shorter officer stated, his tone sharp and unforgiving. "We rushed into a crowded high-end establishment expecting a dangerous hostile situation. Instead, we find crystal-clear video evidence proving that you were the sole aggressor, harassing a woman who was simply trying to eat her dinner in peace. We have people with actual, life-threatening emergencies who need our immediate assistance, and you decided to waste our valuable time playing petty vindictive games because you did not get your way." The taller officer pulled a pair of heavy metal handcuffs from his belt. The distinct clicking sound echoed loudly across our tense table. "Turn around and place both of your hands securely behind your back, ma'am. You are being officially placed under arrest for the malicious misuse of the emergency dispatch system and filing a fraudulent police report." Courtney let out a blood-curdling shriek, desperately clawing at Julian's tailored suit jacket. "Julian, do something. You cannot let them arrest me. My father will absolutely kill you if I end up in a dirty jail cell." Julian immediately jumped directly into the officer's path, puffing out his chest in a desperate, foolish attempt to establish dominance. He quickly reached into his expensive breast pocket and aggressively shoved a thick gold-embossed business card right into the taller officer's face. "You need to back off right now." Julian barked, his voice dripping with arrogant, unearned entitlement. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am Julian Vance. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Developments. We are a massive multi-million-dollar luxury real estate firm in Atlanta. We pay the heavy taxes that fund your modest salaries. You are absolutely not putting handcuffs on my wife over a simple, harmless misunderstanding." The officer did not even glance at the fancy business card. He simply swatted Julian's hand away with a swift, dismissive motion. "Sir, step aside immediately, or you will be placed under arrest for interfering with an active police investigation. I do not care how much money you claim to have, and I certainly do not care what imaginary real estate empire you think you run. Your wife broke the law, and she is going to suffer the strict legal consequences." My father Charles realized that Julian's aggressive tactics were failing miserably. He quickly stepped forward, smoothing down his tie and shifting into his most polished, heavily practiced, respectable persona. He flashed the officers a wide, charming smile that he normally reserved for exclusive country club banquets and elite political fundraisers. "Officers, please, let us all just take a deep breath and lower the temperature in this room," Charles said smoothly, using his deep, authoritative voice. "I am Charles Vance. I serve on several highly prominent executive boards in this fine city. We are highly respected, upstanding members of the elite business community. My daughter-in-law was simply overwhelmed by a sudden, stressful family dispute. It was a pure emotional reaction, not a malicious criminal act. I am personal friends with the police commissioner, and I am quite certain we can resolve this tiny misunderstanding quietly without dragging anyone out of here in metal handcuffs and causing a humiliating public spectacle." The officers exchanged a weary, unimpressed glance. They were completely immune to my family's desperate, pathetic attempts to weaponize their perceived social status. The taller officer moved to grab Courtney's wrist, and she let out another piercing, dramatic wail. That was when I finally decided to intervene. I slowly raised my hand, signaling the two police officers to pause. "Officers, wait a moment, please," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the chaotic shouting. They stopped, turning respectfully toward me. They knew I held the ultimate power in this specific situation, not just as the verified victim of the harassment, but as the wealthy owner of the property where the incident was taking place. "Madam CEO, we have sufficient evidence to take her into custody right now," the taller officer offered politely. You do not have to tolerate this kind of blatant harassment in your own establishment. I am fully aware of that, I replied, giving them a calm, reassuring smile. However, I do not want the unpleasant sight of police dragging a crying, hysterical woman through my beautiful lobby to disturb my other dining guests any further. It is bad for business. I have all of her personal information, and I possess the security footage. I will formally decline to press charges tonight. I strongly prefer to handle this particular trash myself privately. Courtney let out a massive, dramatic sigh of relief, sagging heavily against Julian. My parents instantly relaxed their rigid shoulders. They actually thought my decision was a sign of lingering family loyalty or weakness. They had absolutely no idea that I was simply saving them for a much more devastating, carefully orchestrated execution. The police officers nodded in understanding. "It is your property and your call, ma'am," the shorter officer said. He turned back to Courtney, his expression remaining hard and disgusted. "Consider yourself incredibly lucky tonight. If we ever get called out here for your nonsense again, you are going straight to a holding cell. Do you understand me?" Courtney nodded frantically, too terrified to speak. The officers tipped their hats respectfully toward me and swiftly marched out of the grand dining room, leaving my deeply humiliated family standing awkwardly in front of my table. The heavy silence returned, but the power dynamic in the room had permanently, irrevocably shifted. I remained seated in my comfortable chair, sipping my sparkling water, as I watched them try to process their severe public defeat. Valerie stared at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Julian looked furious, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Courtney was busy wiping her ruined makeup with a napkin, her face flushed with pure shame. Charles was the only one who refused to accept his total loss of control. He stared at me, his dark eyes narrowing into slits of pure, calculating hatred. He could not comprehend how the dark-skinned, quiet daughter he had discarded like useless garbage had suddenly gained so much immense, undeniable power over him. His fragile ego demanded an explanation that fit his twisted, highly prejudiced worldview. He leaned forward, placing both of his hands flat on my table, his face inches from mine. "Do not think for one single second that you have won anything tonight, Sienna," Charles angrily whispered, his voice shaking with intense, barely contained rage. "I know exactly how the real world works. A nobody like you does not just wake up one morning and magically buy an $80 million luxury resort. You had absolutely nothing when we cut you off. You must have maliciously stolen your initial startup money directly from the family trust fund." I looked deeply into my father's furious eyes, letting a slow, chillingly cold laugh escape my lips. "You believe I stole from the trust fund?" I asked, cold laughter cutting through the tension. "That is a fascinating accusation coming from the man who personally emptied that exact account 7 years ago." My mother gasped, clutching her throat. "Sienna, shut your mouth. You have no idea what you are talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I replied, reaching into my tote bag. I pulled out my silver tablet, tapped the screen, and slid it toward Courtney. "Take a close look at those official bank records. Go ahead, read the highlighted transactions." Courtney hesitated, her eyes darting nervously toward Julian, who had suddenly gone completely pale. She reached her shaking hand out and pulled the tablet closer. Her eyes scanned the screen and the color drained from her face. "What is this?" Courtney whispered, trembling with confusion. "These are massive wire transfers, millions moving from a trust fund directly into Julian's personal accounts." "Yes," I stated clearly. "That was the trust fund my late grandmother left for my education. Charles and Valerie illegally drained every penny of my inheritance to pay off Julian's massive secret gambling debts. They used my money to buy those luxury cars Julian drives to impress your wealthy white family. Your supposedly brilliant self-made husband is a complete fraud. He built his entire real estate empire on my stolen inheritance." Julian lunged forward, desperately trying to snatch the tablet. "Courtney, do not look at that. Those documents are fabricated. She is just a bitter liar trying to ruin our marriage." Courtney snatched the tablet out of his reach, her eyes wide with horror as she scrolled through the undeniable proof. The meticulously crafted illusion of Julian as a wealthy mogul shattered right in front of her. She realized she had married a broke fraud who relied entirely on thievery to maintain his elite status. You lied to me, Courtney shrieked, shoving Julian away with both hands. You told me you built your company from the ground up. You told my father you were financially independent. You are nothing but a thief. Valerie rushed forward in a desperate attempt at damage control. Courtney, please, you must understand Julian just needed a tiny bridge loan to get his business off the ground. We were going to put the money back. Sienna did not need it anyway. She was meant to just settle down quietly. Julian is the future of this family. Get away from me! Courtney screamed, swatting my mother's hands away with absolute disgust. The realization that she was tied to a massive financial scandal triggered her ultimate defense mechanism. She frantically pulled out her smartphone. I am calling my father right now. He is going to completely destroy all of you, and he is going to annihilate this stupid resort. My father's eyes widened in absolute terror. Courtney, please wait. Let us just discuss this rationally. Courtney completely ignored Charles. Her shaking fingers rapidly dialed a number, and she hit the speakerphone button, slamming the device down onto the table for everyone to hear. The phone rang twice before a deep booming voice echoed through the dining room. Courtney, sweetheart, what is wrong? I am in the middle of a very important committee meeting. Senator Sterling answered, his tone dripping with impatience. Daddy, you have to help me right now. Courtney sobbed hysterically into the phone. I am at this awful resort, and these horrible people are viciously attacking me. Julian is a complete fraud, and his aggressive sister is claiming she owns this entire place. She is maliciously threatening me and refusing to let us stay in our reserved suite. You have to use your bank to crush her business. Daddy, destroy her. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. When the senator spoke again, his voice was pure concentrated venom. Listen to me very carefully, whoever you are. Senator Sterling growled through the speakerphone, addressing me directly. I do not care what kind of pathetic establishment you think you run. I am Senator William Sterling. I sit on the Banking Regulatory Committee, and I own the largest commercial lending institution in this state. If you do not immediately apologize to my daughter, comp her weekend, and upgrade her to your best suite, I will personally see to it that your business credit lines are permanently frozen by Monday morning. I will launch a regulatory nightmare of inspections that will shut your pathetic resort down for good. You will be bankrupt and begging on the streets before the end of the month. Do you understand me? Valerie and Charles visibly relaxed, exchanging a triumphant look. They thought the senator's massive political and financial power had finally put me back in my subordinate place. Julian puffed out his chest again, smirking down at me. You really messed up this time, Sienna, Charles whispered aggressively, a cruel smile twisting his face. You should have just surrendered the room when we told you to. Now you are going to lose everything. I never flinched. I did not break a sweat. I simply sat there patiently listening to the senator's pompous rant finish, echoing through the silent dining room. I slowly picked up my linen napkin, delicately dabbing the corners of my mouth before leaning intimately close to the phone sitting on the table. That is a very fascinating, incredibly bold threat, Senator Sterling. I said, my voice smooth, and dangerously calm. However, you seem to be operating under a massive misunderstanding of who currently holds the power in this conversation. I am not just a simple resort owner. The speakerphone remained completely dead silent. Allow me to properly introduce myself. I continued, savoring every single syllable. My name is Sienna Vance. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Equity. Yes, that Vanguard Equity. The exact same private equity firm that just aggressively orchestrated a hostile, legally binding takeover of your failing commercial bank 3 hours ago. The heavy silence that poured from the speakerphone was absolute and suffocating. It was not just a pause. It was the terrifying, breathless quiet of a very powerful man suddenly realizing he had stepped blindly into a devastating trap. I remained comfortably seated in my dining chair, casually swirling the ice in my crystal water glass, allowing the heavy weight of my words to fully crush the arrogant atmosphere in the room. Courtney stared at the glowing phone on the table, her mouth hanging slightly open as she waited for her father to unleash his promised wrath. Julian shifted his weight nervously, his eyes darting between me and the silent device. My parents stood completely frozen, their confident postures evaporating into raw uncertainty. Senator Sterling, are you still there? I asked, my voice smooth and perfectly polite. I would hate for our very first official conversation to be cut short due to a poor cellular connection. A shaky, raspy breath finally echoed through the speaker. When the senator spoke again, the booming, aggressive venom had entirely vanished from his voice. "This is highly inappropriate," he stammered, attempting to maintain a thin shred of his former authority. "Vanguard Equity has been acquiring proxy shares through blind trusts for months. You cannot possibly have secured a majority voting stake without triggering a mandatory federal disclosure." I let out a soft, highly amused laugh. "I triggered the federal disclosure exactly 3 hours ago, right before the market closed for the weekend. My legal team filed the necessary paperwork with the Securities and Exchange Commission at precisely 4 o'clock this afternoon. I now control 62% of your voting shares. I know absolutely everything about your failing institution, Senator. I know about the toxic assets you have been desperately hiding in offshore holding companies. I know about the severely defaulted commercial real estate loans you have been illegally burying to pass your quarterly regulatory audits. And most importantly, I know that you personally authorized a massive unsecured loan to my brother Julian, despite his complete lack of liquid capital." Courtney shook her head frantically, leaning closer to the phone. "Daddy, what is she talking about? Just freeze her accounts. Tell her you are going to destroy her resort." "Shut your mouth, Courtney!" the senator hissed through the phone, his voice vibrating with absolute panic. "Do not say another word." Courtney flinched violently, stepping backward as if she had just been physically slapped. She had never heard her father speak to her with such raw, unfiltered aggression. "You see, Senator," I continued, folding my hands elegantly on the table, "you spent years building your pristine political reputation on fiscal responsibility and conservative values. But your bank is currently drowning in a massive sea of toxic debt. You handed out millions of dollars to your wealthy country club friends and your terribly unqualified son-in-law, and now you are completely insolvent. You were quietly praying for a federal bailout to save your legacy. Instead, you got me." I paused, making sure every single person at the table hung on my next words. "On Monday morning at 9 o'clock, I am convening an emergency meeting of the board of directors," I stated clearly, my tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "As the majority shareholder, I hold the unchallengeable power to restructure the entire executive leadership team. I am going to fire you, Senator. I am going to strip you of your title as Chief Executive Officer. I am going to publicly liquidate your golden parachute pension to cover the massive losses you caused. And I am going to hand your internal financial records directly over to federal prosecutors to investigate your fraudulent lending practices. Your career ends on Monday." The sound of the senator taking a sharp, desperate breath filled the dining room. The shift in the power dynamic was sudden, violent, and incredibly satisfying. "Ms. Vance, please!" Senator Sterling begged, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "Let us be reasonable about this situation. We are both smart, pragmatic business professionals. There is absolutely no need to destroy a legacy that took 40 years to build. I can step down quietly. I can announce an early medical retirement. I will surrender my board seat peacefully, but please do not bring the federal prosecutors into this. It will completely ruin my political career. It will destroy my family. I am asking you for mercy." Valerie and Charles stared at the phone in absolute, unadulterated horror. The incredibly powerful white politician they had worshipped, the man they had bent over backward to impress at the expense of their own biological daughter, was currently begging and crying for his professional life. Julian looked like he was going to vomit. His entire fabricated real estate empire relied strictly on his father-in-law's illegal financial protection. Courtney could not process the brutal reality unfolding in front of her. Her immense white privilege and inherited status were being effortlessly dismantled by a black woman she had deemed entirely beneath her. She lunged toward the table, screaming into the phone. "Daddy, stop it. Do not beg this aggressive woman for anything. You are a United States Senator. You have immense power. Arrest her, destroy her business. She is just a jealous nobody." "I said shut up!" Senator Sterling roared through the speaker, the sheer volume of his scream causing the crystal glasses on the table to vibrate. "You stupid, entitled little girl. You have absolutely no idea what you have done. This woman holds my entire life in the palm of her hand, and you are actively provoking her. You will close your mouth right now. You will get down on your knees, and you will profusely apologize to Ms. Vance for disrespecting her. Do you understand me? Apologize to her right now, or I will cut you out of my will forever. Courtney's jaw dropped open. Her entire body began to tremble. She dropped her phone in sheer terror. Courtney dropped her phone. The heavy device clattered loudly against the pristine marble floor, the sharp cracking sound echoing through the perfectly silent dining room. She collapsed into the nearest velvet chair, burying her pale face in her trembling hands, as loud, uncontrollable sobs racked her entire body. The impenetrable shield of her white privilege and inherited political power had just been completely obliterated in less than 5 minutes. My parents remained frozen in place, their prestigious reputation and carefully curated social standing flashing before their terrified eyes. Julian, however, was a different story. The golden boy of the Vance family had spent his entire 36 years being shielded from every consequence. Seeing his powerful father-in-law neutralized did not humble him. It only ignited his arrogant desperation to prove he was the alpha male. He adjusted his expensive designer tie, puffing out his chest, before turning his furious glare back toward my table. You think destroying her father's bank means you have defeated me? Let me make something perfectly clear right now. I never needed his failing bank, and I certainly do not need his pathetic political connections. I am Julian Vance. I built a massive multi-million-dollar real estate empire entirely from the ground up. My company, Apex Developments, is untouchable. We are currently developing the most lucrative commercial properties in the entire Atlanta metropolitan area. You might have gotten lucky with some private equity firm, but you are still just my jealous little sister. You have absolutely no idea how real wealth operates. I have investors begging to throw money at my projects. I have access to private capital that a boutique resort owner like you could never comprehend. So go ahead and fire her corrupt father. I am a self-made mogul, and my financial empire is completely bulletproof. I sat back in my luxurious dining chair, completely unfazed by his loud, pathetic posturing. I let out a soft, highly amused laugh. He was standing on a burning bridge, proudly bragging about how well he could swim. I simply turned my head slightly and looked at Marcus, my head of private security, who was standing quietly by the grand entrance. Marcus, I said smoothly, my voice carrying a chilling authority, please bring me the second folder. Marcus nodded respectfully, retrieving a thick red manila folder from his jacket. He walked across the dining room, placed the folder directly onto the table in front of me, and stepped back. I rested my manicured hands on top of the smooth paper, looking up at my brother's arrogant face. A self-made mogul, I repeated slowly. That is a very fascinating narrative, Julian. It is truly remarkable how you managed to believe your own ridiculous lies. But as a successful private equity chief executive officer, I do not deal in fabricated stories. I deal exclusively in hard, undeniable facts. I opened the red folder, deliberately extracting a thick stack of highly confidential legal documents. I spread the crisp papers out across the linen tablecloth, so the bold black text was clearly visible. Julian's eyes darted downward, and I watched the arrogant color rapidly drain from his handsome face. Let us talk about this untouchable real estate empire of yours, Julian. I stated, my tone sharp and unforgiving. Apex Developments has not broken ground on a single new commercial property in over 14 months. You have been aggressively bleeding cash to maintain your flashy lifestyle. When Senator Sterling secretly realized you were completely bankrupt, he officially refused to approve any more fraudulent loans from his commercial bank. You needed a massive infusion of liquid capital to stop your house of cards from collapsing. Julian swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as his arrogant posture began to visibly crumble. Those are completely private corporate financial records, he stammered, his voice suddenly losing its aggressive edge. You have absolutely no legal right to possess those internal documents. I have every legal right, Julian, I countered, tapping a manicured fingernail against the top document. Because when the traditional banking sector entirely rejected your desperate applications, you turned to the shadow market. You recklessly sought funding from a high-risk, high-yield private lending institution just to keep your fake empire afloat. You signed a legally binding contract for a $10 million commercial loan with an aggressive interest rate you could never possibly afford to repay. My father Charles stepped forward, his eyes wide with absolute horror. $10 million, Julian, what is she talking about? You told me the company was generating record-breaking profits. Julian completely ignored our father, staring at me with a mixture of pure panic and rising terror. He was finally beginning to understand the catastrophic trap he had blindly walked into. You failed to make your massive quarterly payment last month, Julian. I continued, my voice echoing coldly through the room. You officially defaulted on a $10 million loan. Your shadow lender immediately issued a formal notice of default triggering the aggressive penalty clauses hidden deep within your terrible contract. You are not a wealthy real estate mogul. You are a broke, desperate fraud drowning in an ocean of insurmountable debt. You do not know what you are talking about, Julian shouted, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. My private lender is giving me a temporary extension. We are currently negotiating a very simple restructuring plan. They are not going to call the loan. I leaned forward, locking my eyes directly onto his terrified, sweating face, ready to deliver the ultimate devastating blow that would destroy him forever. There is absolutely no extension, Julian, I said, a vicious, triumphant smile spreading across my face. And there will be no restructuring plan. You see, Vanguard Equity specializes in aggressively acquiring highly distressed commercial debt. We bought your defaulted $10 million loan from that shadow lender 3 weeks ago. I am the shadow lender, Julian. I own 100% of your debt. The finality of my words struck Julian with devastating force. He stumbled backward, his shoes slipping against the polished marble floor. His chest began to heave erratically as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. The golden boy of the family was hyperventilating right in the middle of the grand dining room. He grabbed a chair to steady himself, his face covered in cold sweat. He opened his mouth to deny the truth, but no words came out. He knew he was trapped. My mother could no longer maintain her silent horror. Seeing her favored son collapsing broke through her shock. She rushed forward, pushing past my father to wrap her arms around Julian. She glared at me, her eyes burning with a toxic mixture of fear and pure hatred. Sienna, you stop this vicious attack right now, Valerie demanded, shaking with desperate rage. You are completely out of control. I do not care what sneaky financial tricks you played to buy his loan. You will forgive his debt immediately. You will cancel whatever fraudulent paperwork you hold and leave your brother alone. You owe us your loyalty. I slowly leaned back. I owe you nothing, Mom. You abandoned me in Baltimore every summer because my skin was too dark for your elite vacation photos. You drained my entire inheritance to fund his fake lifestyle. Do not stand there and preach about loyalty. Valerie stood taller, attempting to reclaim her moral high ground. We built a prestigious reputation in Atlanta. We represent Black excellence. We fought hard to sit at tables where people who look like us are normally turned away. Julian is a successful Black man building a legacy for our community. And you are trying to tear him down just to satisfy your own childish jealousy. You are betraying your own people by destroying him in front of these white politicians. I looked at Courtney, who was sobbing silently in her chair, then back at my mother. It was absolutely fascinating how Valerie weaponized our race only when it suited her narrative. There is no Black excellence here, I said smoothly. Julian is not building a legacy. He is a reckless fraud who squandered every advantage you stole for him. He borrowed money from a shadow lender because no legitimate bank would trust him. You are not protecting a pioneer. You are protecting a thief. My father stepped forward, his face pale and tight. Enough of this nonsense. We will refinance. I have powerful connections. We will find a reputable bank, pay off whatever fraction of this debt you claim to own, and be done with you forever. You will not ruin my son over a temporary cash flow problem. Refinance, I laughed. You really do not understand how shadow lending works. This is a high-risk, unregulated commercial loan. Shadow lenders do not hand out $10 million based on a charming smile. They demand immediate ironclad collateral. And because Julian's company has zero actual assets, he had to put up something deeply personal. The confusion on my father's face was instantaneous. He looked at Julian, whose hyperventilating had worsened. Julian was shaking his head frantically, silently pleading with me to stop talking. Collateral, Charles asked, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. Julian, what did you give them? You told me you secured the funding through a private investor group based on your projected building revenue. What did you use? Julian could not answer. He squeezed his eyes shut, turning his face away from our father. I will gladly answer that question, I said, reaching into the red manila folder one last time. I extracted a heavy legal document featuring bright red notary stamps and official seals. I slid it deliberately across the white linen tablecloth, stopping it right in front of my father's hands. Shadow lenders require hard, tangible assets that they can liquidate immediately upon default, I explained, maintaining unblinking eye contact. Since Julian owns absolutely nothing of value, he had to provide something that held massive, undeniable equity. Read the front page of that agreement, Charles. Look at the property listed under the collateral section. My father's hands trembled violently as he picked up the heavy document. He pulled his reading glasses from his breast pocket and stared down at the crisp white paper. My mother leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the bold text. It took them 5 seconds to process the information. Valerie let out a piercing scream, covering her mouth as she stumbled backward. Charles dropped the document onto the table as if it had physically burned his fingers. The powerful patriarch of the Vance family looked completely broken. You put up our house, Charles gasped, his voice cracking into a devastated wheeze. You put up the generational estate in Atlanta. That house has been in our family for 4 generations. It is our entire retirement. Julian fell to his knees, grasping at his father's pant leg. Dad, I am so sorry. I was going to pay it back. The luxury high-rise project was supposed to double my money. I just needed a bridge loan. I was going to quietly remove the lien before you found out. How did you even do this? Valerie shrieked, her voice echoing around the room. The house is solely in our names. You cannot legally leverage a property that you do not own. I leaned forward, clasping my hands tightly together, ready to deliver the final crushing hook that would burn their world to ash. He did not just leverage your property, Mom, I stated, my voice echoing with icy precision. Julian forged both of your signatures on the transfer deeds. He committed blatant federal wire fraud and severe identity theft to secure that cash. He illegally pledged your generational mansion as the sole collateral for his $10 million shadow loan. And because he officially defaulted last month, I now own the legal right to foreclose on your ancestral home. The reality of my words slammed into the room with the force of a physical blow. For a fraction of a second, nobody breathed. The opulent surroundings of the 5-star restaurant faded into the background as the pristine, meticulously crafted facade of the Vance family shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Valerie was the first to break the paralyzing silence. She turned away from me and launched herself toward Julian. Her hands, trembling with absolute fury, grabbed the lapels of his expensive tailored suit. She shook him violently, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face as she let out a guttural scream of pure desperation. How could you do this to us? Valerie shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings and causing the remaining restaurant staff to freeze in shock. That house is our entire life. It is our legacy. Your grandfather built that estate with his bare hands, and you secretly signed it away to a shadow lender. You traded our generational wealth for a temporary cash injection. What is wrong with you? Charles did not try to hold his wife back. Instead, he stepped right up next to her, his face contorted into a mask of absolute rage and profound betrayal. He pointed a shaking finger directly between Julian's eyes. You looked me dead in the face and swore your development company was generating record-breaking profits. Charles roared, completely abandoning his respectable, polished country club persona. You sat at my dining room table drinking my scotch and told me you were building a luxury high-rise that would cement the Vance name in Atlanta history forever. I bragged about you to the entire community. I told the mayor you were a visionary, and the whole time you were just a pathetic, broke fraud stealing the roof right over your own parents' heads. Julian stumbled backward, frantically trying to pry our mother's desperate hands off his ruined suit jacket. He looked around the room like a cornered animal searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to hide. He locked eyes with Courtney, silently pleading for his wife to intervene and save him. Courtney slowly stood up from her chair, her face pale and her eyes wide with undisguised disgust. The fragile, tearful victim act she had weaponized against me just 20 minutes ago had completely vanished. She stared at Julian as if she were looking at a diseased rat. "Do not ever dare look at me for help." Courtney spat, her voice dripping with venomous contempt. "You lied to me from the very first day we met. You told my father you were a self-made real estate mogul. You bought me this massive diamond ring and swore you paid for it in cash from a commercial property sale. I paraded you around my elite social circles because I actually believed you were a wealthy, successful businessman. You are nothing but a cheap con artist." Courtney stepped closer, jabbing her manicured finger hard into Julian's chest. "My father is Senator Sterling. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is going to be for my family? You used my father's bank to prop up your fake empire, and when he cut you off, you resorted to identity theft against your own parents, just to maintain your pathetic illusion of wealth. You are a broke, desperate liar, Julian. I am absolutely sick to my stomach that I ever let you touch me." "Courtney, please, you have to understand." Julian pleaded, his voice cracking as tears of panic finally spilled down his cheeks. "I did it all for us. I did it to give you the luxurious lifestyle you expected. I was going to pay it back." "You did not do this for her," I stated coldly, interrupting his pathetic excuses. "You did this because you are a weak, incompetent man who lacks the actual intelligence to build real wealth." Julian whipped his head toward me, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. He suddenly turned his raging anger away from Courtney and directed it entirely at Charles and Valerie. "You want to know why I did it?" Julian screamed, his voice breaking into a hysterical, unhinged pitch. "I did it because of you. Both of you. You shoved me onto a massive pedestal the second I was born and demanded absolute perfection every single day of my life. You forced me to be the ultimate golden boy. You told everyone in Atlanta that I was a brilliant business prodigy before I even graduated college." Julian paced back and forth, wildly gesturing toward our stunned parents. "I never had a chance to figure out who I actually was. You dictated my major, you chose my friends, and you pushed me to marry into a wealthy white political family just to elevate our social status. You set impossible standards and expected me to magically fund this massive, luxurious facade to keep up with your rich friends. When my very first real estate project failed, you refused to let me admit defeat. You told me to fake it until I made it to project success at all costs. Well, I faked it, Dad. I faked you every advantage in the world. We sacrificed your sister's entire childhood and her college trust fund just to make sure you had the best cars, the best clothes, and the best opportunities. We protected you from every single mistake you ever made. And that is exactly why I am completely ruined right now." Julian roared back, veins violently popping in his neck. "You never let me fail, so I never learned how to actually survive the real world. I only took that terrible shadow loan because I was completely terrified. I desperately had to cover up the $10 million I maliciously embezzled from my own private clients." The word embezzled hung in the air like a live grenade detonated right in the center of our table. Absolute paralyzing silence consumed the space. The soft jazz music playing from hidden speakers suddenly felt incredibly loud. The few remaining restaurant patrons sitting at the far end of the dining room had completely stopped eating, their forks frozen halfway to their mouths. Julian stood still, his shoulders rising and falling with rapid, shallow breaths. The terrifying realization of what he had just screamed in a crowded public restaurant finally crashed down on him. He brought both of his trembling hands up to cover his mouth, his wide eyes darting frantically around the room as if searching for a way to rewind time and swallow those damning words back into his throat. Valerie slumped against the edge of the linen-covered table. She looked as though all the air had been violently punched right out of her lungs. The pristine, highly respected image she had spent 4 decades meticulously crafting among the Atlanta elite was completely destroyed by a single unhinged confession. Her beloved golden child, the pioneer of Black excellence she had so proudly paraded around her exclusive social clubs, had just publicly admitted to committing massive corporate fraud. Charles was the first person to break the suffocating silence. The intense, fiery rage that had animated his strict posture just moments ago completely vanished. He looked like an old, broken man. He slowly took a step toward me, raising his hands in a pathetic, desperate gesture of surrender. The commanding patriarch who had spent my entire life ordering me around and treating my existence like a shameful burden was suddenly preparing to beg. "Sienna, listen to me." Charles pleaded, his deep voice trembling with raw, unfamiliar panic. "You must lower your voice. We have to stop talking about this right now before anyone else hears us. We can fix this situation quietly. We can handle this privately, strictly as a family." I remained seated, watching his desperate performance with detached fascination. "There is absolutely no family to handle this with, Charles," I said smoothly. "You made that perfectly clear when you shoved me onto a bus to Baltimore every summer while you all sipped expensive champagne on yachts. You made that clear when you stole my college trust fund. I will pay you back every single penny," Charles begged, leaning so far across the table that he nearly knocked over a crystal wine glass. "I will sign the Atlanta estate over to you right now. You can have the house. You can take all the equity. Just please, Sienna, you must keep this quiet. If this gets out into the public, Julian will go to federal prison. Our entire legacy in the community will be permanently destroyed. We will do whatever you want. Name your price." Julian fell to his knees beside his father, his expensive suit pants hitting the hard marble floor. "Please, Sienna." Julian sobbed, the arrogant entitlement entirely washed away by sheer terror. "I will give you my company. I will work for you. I will do whatever it takes. You cannot let them lock me in a cage. You are my little sister. You have to protect me." Valerie reached across the table, desperately trying to grab my hand, but I swiftly pulled it away. "Sienna, I am begging you as your mother," Valerie cried, heavy tears ruining her perfectly applied makeup. "You cannot destroy your own flesh and blood. You know how the justice system treats black men. They will make a brutal example out of him. They will throw away the key. You have the wealth and power to bury this debt and save his life. You have to protect your brother." I looked at the three of them, a pathetic tableau of desperate, miserable hypocrites. They were actively trying to weaponize my morality, my race, and my non-existent family loyalty to shield a criminal who had never once protected me. "You really think you can use the justice system as an excuse to cover up your greed?" I asked, my voice slicing through their pathetic sobbing. Julian did not steal a loaf of bread to feed a starving family. He maliciously embezzled $10 million from hard-working private clients so he could buy luxury sports cars and pretend he was a wealthy mogul to impress his racist, privileged wife. He stole that money to fund the exact same fake, elitist lifestyle that you two have worshipped your entire lives. Do not invoke the struggles of our community to justify your absolute moral bankruptcy. Charles slowly dropped down to his trembling knees, right next to the weeping Julian. The sight of the proud, arrogant man groveling on the floor of my restaurant was deeply satisfying, but it was far too late for apologies. "Sienna, I am so incredibly sorry for everything we ever did to you." Charles wept, bowing his head. "We were horrible parents. We were wrong. We admit it. Just please have mercy on your family." "Mercy is a privilege reserved for people who actually show remorse before they get caught," I stated coldly. "You are not sorry for abusing me. You are just terrified of losing your country club memberships and facing federal indictments." I reached into my purse, pulling out my smartphone. The screen was brightly illuminated, displaying an active phone call. The timer showed it had been connected for exactly 14 minutes. "You are begging the wrong person for mercy," I said, a vicious smile spreading across my face as I held the phone up for all of them to see. I muted my microphone when Courtney called her father. "I have been on an open conference call with my corporate legal team and 3 senior investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission for the last 15 minutes. They heard every single word of your highly detailed and completely voluntary confession, Julian. You will go to federal prison." Julian collapsed completely against the heavy mahogany chair, his expensive tailored pants sliding against the polished marble floor. The sheer gravity of federal prison finally fractured his arrogant reality. He stared at my illuminated smartphone screen, as if it were a loaded weapon aimed directly at his chest. The silence in the dining room was no longer just tense. It was the suffocating, breathless quiet of total destruction. My mother Valerie could no longer maintain her pristine high society composure. The prominent Atlanta socialite, who had spent decades meticulously curating her perfect image for her elite circle, completely broke down. She threw herself onto the floor, her designer dress bunching up awkwardly around her knees. She crawled across the short distance between us, her hands reaching out to grab the hem of my dress. Heavy mascara-stained tears poured down her face, ruining her flawless makeup. "Sienna, please, you cannot do this to your own family." Valerie wept, her voice a shrill, desperate plea that echoed loudly across the empty tables. "You cannot send your only brother to a federal penitentiary. We are your blood. I am your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I held you when you were sick. Do you not remember when you were a little girl, I used to sit on the edge of your bed every single night and gently brush your hair? I braided your hair, Sienna. You were my sweet little baby. You cannot destroy the boy I raised. You have to tell those investigators it was a joke. You have to hang up that phone right now." I looked down at the weeping woman clutching my clothes. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy. I did not feel sad. I just felt a profound, freezing emptiness. I slowly reached down and firmly pried her shaking fingers off my fabric, stepping back so she was forced to look up at my face. "You brushed my hair when I was a toddler, Mom," I said, my voice echoing with icy precision. "But the moment I grew older and my skin tone did not match the light, bright, perfect aesthetic you needed for your elite country club photos, your maternal love completely vanished. You did not want to brush my hair anymore. You did not want to be seen with me at your prestigious banquets. You needed a flawless, acceptable family portrait to show off to your wealthy friends, and my dark skin was a massive inconvenience to your precious social climbing." Valerie gasped, shaking her head frantically, but I did not stop speaking. "Every single summer for 12 long years, you and Charles packed your designer luggage and took Julian to Martha's Vineyard. You rented massive luxury yachts and stayed in five-star resorts. And every single summer you shoved me onto a cheap bus and shipped me off to Aunt Beatrice's tiny, unair-conditioned house in Baltimore. I spent my childhood sweating in a cramped, humid bedroom, while you and your golden boy lived a life of pure luxury. You told your friends I was just too difficult to handle. You lied and said I preferred staying in the city. But I knew the absolute truth, Mom. I knew I was too dark, too quiet, and too embarrassing for your fake, polished world." Charles tried to step forward to comfort his sobbing wife, but his own profound shame kept him frozen in place. He had actively participated in my erasure. He had funded Julian's lavish lifestyle by draining my grandmother's trust fund, all while leaving me to fend for myself. "So do not kneel on my floor and weaponize your false maternal love," I commanded, staring down at Valerie. "You made your choice 12 years ago. You chose your fake reputation over your biological daughter. You built a massive pedestal for Julian and handed him a crown he never earned. Now you get to sit in the front row and watch his entire fraudulent kingdom burn to the ground. I am not hanging up this phone. I am not saving him. The investigators have everything they need to secure a federal indictment by Monday morning." While my mother collapsed into a fresh wave of hysterical sobbing, Courtney was standing completely still by the table. Her tear-stained face had contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The wealthy daughter of Senator Sterling was rapidly processing the catastrophic reality of her current situation. Her supposedly rich, successful husband was not just broke. He was a confessed felon who had maliciously embezzled $10 million. He was going to federal prison, and he was taking her pristine social reputation down with him. The massive diamond engagement ring on Courtney's finger suddenly looked like a heavy, suffocating shackle. She realized that because they were legally married, Julian's massive financial crimes and enormous shadow lender debts could potentially bleed directly into her own private personal assets. Her inherited white privilege and her father's massive political power could not magically erase a legally recorded federal confession to the powerful Securities and Exchange Commission. The pristine, highly enviable life she had proudly showcased to her wealthy friends was entirely over. She was officially tied to a penniless, thoroughly disgraced criminal. Courtney's wide, absolutely terrified blue eyes darted from Julian's pathetic kneeling form directly to the brightly illuminated smartphone resting very securely in my right hand. Her sheer, unadulterated panic instantly transformed into a blinding, highly destructive, and completely irrational rage. If she could just physically destroy the mobile phone, her twisted, desperate logic reasoned, she could somehow magically stop the federal investigators from ever using the damning audio confession against them. She let out a wild, piercing, guttural scream, her manicured hands curling tightly into vicious claws. Without a single second of hesitation, Courtney lunged aggressively across the spacious dining room, launching her entire body directly at me in a frantic, violent attempt to completely smash the fragile cellular phone against the cold, hard marble floor, desperately hoping to erase his horrific crimes forever. Courtney did not make it halfway across the polished marble floor. Before her outstretched claws came near my phone, Marcus moved with the blinding precision of a trained professional. My head of private security stepped seamlessly into her frantic path, effortlessly blocking her chaotic trajectory. He caught her by the shoulders, using her own wild momentum to redirect her body downward. In one fluid motion, Marcus had Courtney pinned firmly to the expensive carpet, his knee resting securely between her shoulder blades, while he held her wrists neatly behind her back. Courtney thrashed violently against the ground, kicking her designer heels and letting out a piercing shriek of pure outrage. She screamed at Marcus to unhand her, shouting aggressively about her father and her immense wealth, but the seasoned professional did not blink. He held her completely immobilized, looking up at me for my next instruction. Julian finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. Seeing his beautiful, privileged wife pinned to the floor by my security temporarily overrode his terror of federal prison. He scrambled awkwardly to his feet, puffing out his chest as he took a hasty step toward Marcus. "Get your hands off my wife right now," Julian roared, clenching his fists. "I will sue you. I will have you locked up." Two more members of my security team instantly stepped out from the shadows of the dining room, blocking Julian completely. Their intimidating presence forced him to back down. He raised his hands defensively, his false bravado evaporating as he retreated near our horrified parents. My father, Charles, wiped his sweaty forehead with a linen napkin, while my mother, Valerie, remained slumped in her chair, staring blankly at the chaotic scene unfolding before her. The pristine elite image they worshipped for decades was currently pinned to the floor. I calmly looked down at my smartphone. The conference call with the federal investigators had just concluded, the necessary audio evidence securely captured and logged. But before I could place the device back into my purse, the screen lit up with an incoming call. The caller identification displayed Senator Sterling. I smiled warmly, accepting the call and immediately placing it back on speakerphone, setting the volume to maximum so every single person in the quiet dining room could hear clearly. "Senator Sterling," I answered, my voice steady and professional. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this incredibly swift follow-up call?" "Ms. Vance," the senator replied, his deep voice stripped completely of its earlier arrogant hostility. He sounded exhausted, calculating, and entirely focused on pure self-preservation. "I have just initiated an emergency briefing with my personal crisis management team. We are actively reviewing the disastrous financial situation your firm uncovered." Courtney stopped struggling against Marcus. She turned her tear-stained face toward the device, her blue eyes wide with desperate hope. "Daddy, please," Courtney cried out from the floor. "Tell them to let me go. You have to save us from this horrible woman." "Keep your mouth shut, Courtney." Senator Sterling snapped through the speaker, his tone dripping with absolute ice. "I am not speaking to you right now. I am speaking to Ms. Vance." The senator cleared his throat loudly. "Ms. Vance, my legal team advised me that Julian's egregious actions constitute massive fraud. I want to make it unequivocally clear for the official record that neither I nor my banking institution had prior knowledge of his malicious embezzlement or his fraudulent shadow loans. He deliberately lied on his financial disclosures, and he manipulated our institutional trust." Julian gasped, loudly gripping the back of his chair. "Senator, please, I can explain everything. I just need a little bit more time." "You are completely finished, Julian," the senator growled, his voice echoing coldly across the room. "You are a massive liability. You are a confessed felon, and you are about to be indicted by the federal government. I spent 40 years building a pristine political legacy, and I will absolutely not allow a pathetic broke criminal to drag my respected family name through the mud." The senator took a sharp, heavy breath before delivering his final devastating verdict. "Courtney, listen to me very carefully," Senator Sterling commanded. "I have officially contacted the best divorce attorneys in the state. I have instructed them to immediately begin drafting expedited separation papers based on severe financial fraud. You are to immediately sever all physical and emotional ties with that man. You will pack your belongings and return to our estate tonight. But Daddy, I love him, Courtney sobbed weakly. You love the fake money he pretended to have. Her father shot back ruthlessly. I am giving you a simple ultimatum, Courtney. You will leave Julian right this exact second, or you will be entirely cut off from the Sterling family fortune. I will revoke your trust fund, I will cancel your credit cards, and I will permanently remove you from my will. You will be just as broke and pathetic as the criminal you are currently defending. Choose your next move carefully. The line went dead. The sharp click of the disconnected call sealed Julian's absolute destruction. I nodded gracefully to Marcus. He released his firm grip on Courtney, stepping back to give her space. Courtney pushed herself up from the floor, her expensive dress wrinkled and her perfectly styled hair in chaotic ruins. She stood trembling, her eyes darting between the disconnected smartphone on the table and the terrified, sweating face of her husband. Julian reached his shaking hand out toward her. "Courtney, baby, please." He whimpered, tears pouring down his face. "We can get through this together. We are husband and wife. You promised me." Courtney stared at his outstretched hand. The desperate, weeping black man standing in front of her was no longer the wealthy real estate mogul she proudly showcased to elite friends. He was a colossal failure, a convicted felon in waiting, and a direct threat to her luxurious lifestyle. Her immense white privilege demanded total self-preservation at any cost. Her expression hardened into a mask of pure disgust. She reached down to her left hand, grabbing the massive, incredibly expensive diamond engagement ring that Julian bought using my stolen inheritance money. With a vicious tug, Courtney ripped the heavy diamond ring right off her finger. She pulled her arm back and threw the sharp piece of jewelry directly at Julian's face with all of her remaining strength. The heavy ring struck his cheekbone with a loud smack before clattering away onto the marble floor. She quickly turned on her heel and sprinted out of the heavy glass restaurant doors, leaving him completely and totally abandoned forever. The heavy glass doors swung shut, cutting off the frantic clicking of Courtney's designer heels. Julian remained frozen in the center of the dining room, staring at the empty space where his wealthy, privileged wife had just stood. The golden boy of the Vance family was entirely alone, stripped of his fake real estate empire, his prestigious marriage, and his fabricated dignity. My mother Valerie let out a soft, pathetic whimper from her spot on the floor, too stunned to even try to comfort her broken son. The sudden, absolute destruction of Julian's life should have been a massive wake-up call for my father. Instead, Charles Vance did exactly what a deeply narcissistic patriarch always does when his carefully curated world begins to collapse. He completely ignored the emotional devastation happening right in front of him and desperately attempted to reclaim his shattered authority. Charles violently smoothed down his expensive suit jacket, visibly forcing his trembling shoulders back into a rigid, commanding posture. He stepped directly over Valerie's outstretched legs and marched toward my table, his dark eyes burning with a toxic mixture of sheer desperation and unearned arrogance. He slammed both of his hands flat against the white linen tablecloth, leaning his face aggressively close to mine. "You have had your fun, Sienna," Charles commanded, his deep voice dropping into that strict pastoral tone he used to intimidate his congregation. "You proved your point. You showed everyone how much money and power you have quietly accumulated. Now you are going to call your legal team back, and you will fix this massive disaster right this very second. You will pay off that shadow lender, you will settle the embezzlement charges, and you will scrub this entire incident from the public record." I looked at the furious, sweating man standing over my table. "You just watched your beloved daughter-in-law abandon your son because he is a broke, confessed felon. Why on earth would you think I'm going to save him?" "Because this is not just about Julian anymore," Charles barked, spittle flying from his lips. "This is about the Vance family name. Do you have any idea what this scandal will do to our pristine reputation in the community? We are the premier family in Atlanta society. Your mother and I built a flawless legacy within the most exclusive social chapters and elite political circles. We represent the absolute pinnacle of Black excellence. If word gets out that my son committed federal fraud and my family is bankrupt, we will become the ultimate laughingstock of the entire city. It will permanently destroy everything we worked our entire lives to build. You did not build a legacy, Charles, I said calmly, leaning forward to match his intense gaze. You built a highly fragile, incredibly pathetic illusion, and I am not spending a single dime of my hard-earned wealth to prop up your fake empire. You owe this family your loyalty, Charles roared, slamming his fist against the table. You have a fundamental duty to protect our respected standing in the community. Let us mathematically deconstruct your so-called respected standing in the community, I replied, my voice echoing sharply across the silent dining room. Your entire social reputation is a meticulously crafted lie, based entirely on massive, unmanageable debt and vicious colorism. You spent decades looking down your nose at people who did not fit your elitist, light-skinned aesthetic. You intentionally hid your own dark-skinned daughter in a cramped, unair-conditioned house in Baltimore every single summer because I ruined your perfect passing family photos. You desperately craved proximity to whiteness and generational wealth, which is exactly why you sacrificed my college trust fund to buy Julian luxury cars so he could date women like Courtney. Charles opened his mouth to argue, but I quickly raised my hand, silencing him instantly. You loved parroting around your exclusive country clubs, acting like you were old money royalty. I continued savoring the absolute destruction of his massive ego. But real wealth does not require forging signatures on a deed to secure a shady high-interest loan from a predatory shadow lender. Real wealth does not require embezzling $10 million from innocent private clients just to maintain the appearance of success. Your entire life is a hollow, desperate performance. You leased your expensive cars. You mortgaged your ancestral home to the absolute brink of foreclosure. You possess absolutely zero liquid capital. You are not a pioneer of black excellence, Charles. You are just a very loud, incredibly broke man who cares more about impressing strangers at a country club than protecting his own biological children. Valerie finally pushed herself up from the floor, her tear-streaked face twisted in pure agony. Sienna, how can you say these horrible things? Our friends respect us. The community looks up to us. They do not respect you, Mom, I stated coldly, shattering her final desperate delusion. They respect the money they think you have. And the very second they find out Julian is a convicted felon and you are completely bankrupt, those elite friends will drop you faster than Courtney just dropped your son. You will be permanently blacklisted from every single social organization you worship. Charles began to shake violently, realizing that his ultimate nightmare was coming true. His social status was officially dead. You cannot let them take everything from us, Sienna. We have nowhere else to go. We will lose our entire life. You already lost it, I said smoothly, reaching into my red manila folder one final time. I extracted a crisp, professionally printed legal document bearing the official seal of the state of Georgia. I slid the heavy paper directly across the table, stopping it right under my father's trembling hands. Your $10 million loan is in total default. This is the official legally binding foreclosure notice for your generational mansion in Atlanta. You are officially evicted, and you have no power left. Charles stared down at the crisp white document resting beneath his trembling hands. The bold black letters spelling out the foreclosure of our ancestral Atlanta estate seemed to completely break his spirit. He slowly pulled his hands away, looking up at me with eyes that finally recognized the absolute reality of his destruction. There was no political favor he could call in to fix this. There was no wealthy country club friend who would write him a $10 million check to save a confessed embezzler. The untouchable patriarch of the Vance family was finally reduced to absolutely nothing. Valerie remained on the floor, her previously immaculate designer dress, now hopelessly wrinkled and stained with her own tears. She let out a soft, defeated wail, burying her face in her hands as the sheer magnitude of their fast-approaching poverty washed over her. You have precisely 30 days to pack your personal belongings and vacate that mansion, I stated, my voice slicing beautifully through the heavy silence of the dining room. But do not worry about Julian's commercial debt. I have absolutely no intention of waiting 30 days to collect what is rightfully mine. Julian whipped his head toward me, his handsome face glistening with a cold, desperate sweat. What are you talking about? He choked out, his voice cracking violently. You just said you are taking the house, you cannot take anything else from us. I smiled coldly, leaning back in my luxurious chair. The house merely covers the initial collateral, Julian. But your shadow loan contract contains a very specific, highly aggressive acceleration clause. It clearly dictates that if the borrower defaults on a single payment or commits any act of financial fraud, the entire $10 million principal becomes due immediately. Because you just voluntarily confessed to embezzling client funds on an open, federally recorded line, you completely triggered that exact clause. I am officially calling in your entire debt right this very second. Julian stumbled backward, clutching his chest, as if he were having a sudden heart attack. I do not have $10 million, he screamed wildly. I am completely broke. You know I do not have that kind of money. That is highly unfortunate for you, I replied smoothly, standing up from my table and smoothing down my skirt. Because Vanguard Equity will now proceed to systematically liquidate every single asset attached to your fraudulent company. We will seize your luxury vehicles, your frozen bank accounts, and whatever pathetic remnants of your fake real estate empire still exist. I own everything you have ever touched. I stepped away from the table, looking down at my expensive watch with a calculated, dismissive gaze. This highly entertaining family reunion has officially reached its inevitable conclusion. I have extremely important business matters to attend to, and your miserable presence is starting to severely damage the luxurious ambiance of my beautiful resort. You have exactly 10 minutes to gather your things and completely vacate my private property. Charles managed to push himself up from the table, his face flushed with a sudden, desperate anger. The proud man who had spent decades relentlessly bullying me into total submission was now completely powerless, utterly trapped in a terrible nightmare of his very own malicious making. He stumbled slightly heavily, gripping the chair back to keep his balance. You cannot just throw us out onto the street in the middle of the night. We drove here in Julian's car. Where are we supposed to go? I looked at him without a single ounce of pity. You can walk to a cheap motel, you can sleep in the parking lot, or you can start hitchhiking back to Atlanta. I genuinely do not care what you do. But if any of you are still standing on this $80 million property, when my watch hits 10 minutes, my security team will forcibly detain you, and the local police will formally arrest you for criminal trespassing. Your time starts right now. I turned my back on them and walked gracefully toward the grand entrance of the dining room. I did not look back to see Valerie scrambling awkwardly to her feet, desperately brushing dirt from her ruined clothing. I did not watch Charles hopelessly attempting to maintain his shattered dignity as he rushed frantically after me. I simply nodded to Marcus, my highly trained head of security, who immediately gestured for his burly guards to begin herding my completely disgraced family completely out of the restaurant. They were aggressively guided down the long, beautifully illuminated corridor and forcefully pushed directly into the massive, incredibly opulent main lobby of the resort. The sprawling lobby was beautifully decorated with imported Italian marble and priceless, highly curated art installations. My disgraced parents hurried quickly toward the front glass doors, their graying heads bowed down deeply in absolute burning shame as wealthy resort guests paused to closely watch their incredibly humiliating public exit. Julian trailed exactly several short paces behind them, his wide eyes darting wildly and frantically around the deeply luxurious open space. He knew that the massive federal investigation looming over his head would inevitably drain whatever hidden emergency funds he had foolishly stashed away. He was completely desperate, utterly broke, and entirely stripped of his precious Golden Boy elite status. As he quickly passed the grand mahogany reception desk, Julian suddenly slowed his frantic walking pace. His incredibly desperate, greedy gaze locked directly onto a truly stunning, heavy, solid gold decorative centerpiece, resting very elegantly on a small glass side table right near the massive front entrance. Thinking absolutely no one was closely watching his incredibly pathetic criminal movements, Julian very quickly reached his trembling right hand, straight out, aggressively grabbed the incredibly heavy pure gold shining artifact, and frantically tried to quickly shove the extremely valuable shiny piece directly deep into his dark designer suit jacket, hoping this one final pathetic theft would magically save his ruined life today, before he finally escaped outside. Julian grabbed the gold centerpiece, yanking the artifact off the table. He shoved the priceless object into his expensive coat. He took 2 steps toward the exit doors, eyes fixed on the parking lot. He did not make it. A massive hand clamped onto his shoulder, stopping his escape. Julian gasped as Marcus stepped into his path. My security chief grabbed the lapels of Julian's suit jacket and yanked them open. The gold centerpiece tumbled out, hitting the floor with a crash. Guests gasped, staring at the panicked man caught stealing like a street thief. Julian scrambled backward, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture. "It was falling!" Julian stammered loudly, his voice cracking as guests formed a circle. "I was catching it." I stepped out of the corridor to witness the total destruction of my brother's fabricated dignity. I walked into the lobby, enjoying the view of the golden boy trembling under the glare of my security team. The front doors slid open. The 2 police officers who had dealt with Courtney earlier marched back into the lobby, resting hands cautiously on their utility belts as they quickly assessed the chaotic scene. "What is the problem here?" the taller officer demanded, his stern eyes darting from the solid gold centerpiece resting on the marble floor directly to Julian's sweating, terrified face. "This man attempted to steal that gold artifact," Marcus stated clearly. "The item is valued at exactly $45,000. We have the entire incident captured on multiple security cameras." The taller officer recognized Julian from the earlier confrontation. He let out a dark chuckle. "Look who it is, the big real estate mogul. It looks like your successful business empire has officially resorted to petty theft to survive." Julian wildly shook his head, backing away toward my parents. "Officers, listen to me. This is a setup. My sister owns this resort, and she is maliciously trying to frame me." The shorter officer did not hesitate. He unclipped his handcuffs, lunged forward, and grabbed Julian by his collar. He forcefully spun my brother around, slamming him against the marble wall. "Julian Vance, you are officially under arrest for grand larceny," the officer barked, wrenching Julian's arms behind his back. The sharp clicking sound of metal locking around Julian's wrists echoed loudly through the captivated crowd. Valerie let out a shriek. She dropped her handbag and sprinted across the lobby, throwing herself towards the officers. "Get your hands off my son!" Valerie screamed, tears pouring down. "He is a successful black man. You are targeting him because of his race. Let him go." The taller officer effortlessly blocked my mother, holding his hand up in a strict warning. "Ma'am, step back right now, or you will be joining him in my cruiser for assaulting a police officer." Charles rushed forward, grabbing Valerie by the waist and pulling her back before she could do any more damage. The proud patriarch looked completely devastated, but his massive ego demanded one final pathetic stand. "Officers, I am Reverend Charles Vance." My father pleaded, utilizing his pastoral voice. "I have immense political connections. My son simply made a foolish mistake. Let me write a personal check for the artifact right now. We can handle this privately." "Your son is a thief, sir," the taller officer replied coldly. "And his bright future is going to be spent sitting in a county jail cell. Now back away." Valerie wailed uncontrollably, her legs giving out as she collapsed into Charles's arms. She watched in horror as the officers dragged her precious golden boy out the front doors and shoved him into the back seat of a waiting cruiser. Flashing lights illuminated their tear-stained faces. I walked slowly out the front doors, standing gracefully at the top of the grand entrance steps. I looked down at my parents, who were standing alone in the cool night air. The police cruiser sped away, carrying their fake real estate mogul directly to a booking cell. Charles patted his pockets with shaking hands, frantically pulling out his smartphone. "I need to call my personal defense attorney right now," Charles muttered, his voice cracking with panic. "I need to arrange a massive bail payment. Valerie, give me your credit card. We need an emergency retainer immediately." Valerie sniffled loudly, pulling her sleek premium credit card from her purse. She handed it to Charles. He quickly dialed a number, holding the phone to his ear while reading the card numbers aloud to an emergency legal service dispatcher. A few seconds later, Charles stopped talking. He stared blankly at his phone. "What do you mean it is declined?" Charles demanded angrily. "Run it again. That is an elite account with a $50,000 limit." He paused, listening to the dispatcher's response. The last remaining shred of color instantly vanished from his face. The phone slipped slowly from his trembling fingers, hitting the concrete driveway with a dull thud. "They said our entire account has been permanently frozen," Charles whispered, his wide, terrified eyes slowly looking up at my calm face. The shadow lender placed an aggressive financial freeze on all of our liquid assets. I smiled down at them from the top of the stairs, savoring their total destruction. I warned you that your shadow loan contained an acceleration clause, I stated, my voice ringing out clearly. When Vanguard Equity called in your defaulted $10 million debt 10 minutes ago, we automatically seized control of all financial accounts to secure our collateral. Your credit cards are completely frozen. Your bank accounts are drained. Your ancestral house is officially foreclosed. You cannot afford an attorney, you cannot afford a hotel room, and you cannot even order a taxi. Valerie let out a quiet whimper, looking around the dark parking lot. The realization finally hit her with devastating clarity. They had sacrificed my entire life to build a beautiful, shiny lie, and now they had absolutely nowhere to go. 3 months passed with the brutal, unforgiving speed of a collapsing empire. The highly publicized federal indictment of Julian Vance became the ultimate scandal of the Atlanta elite. He was denied bail, sitting in a stark federal holding cell, while investigators meticulously unraveled his $10 million embezzlement scheme. The pristine, untouchable golden boy was officially gone, replaced by a disgraced inmate facing decades in prison. For my parents, the descent into absolute poverty was a swift, humiliating freefall. With their bank accounts permanently frozen and their credit completely destroyed, Charles and Valerie were violently ejected from their luxurious lifestyle. They were reduced to living in a cramped, incredibly cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, utterly abandoned by the wealthy socialites they had spent 40 years desperately trying to impress. Today, their ultimate nightmare was culminating inside the grand, echoing hall of the Fulton County Luxury Real Estate Auction House. I sat quietly in the back row of the auction hall, hidden entirely by the dim lighting, watching my parents desperately cling to their final pathetic shred of hope. Charles wore a severely wrinkled suit that hung loosely on his shrinking frame. Valerie sat beside him, her hair unstyled, gripping her faded designer handbag like a life preserver. They were aggressively whispering to Winston Hayes, a prominent wealthy real estate developer and former deacon at my father's church. I could easily read my parents' desperate body language. They were begging Winston to purchase our ancestral estate at a steep discount, desperately hoping he would allow them to rent the property back for pennies so they could maintain the fragile illusion that they still belonged in high society. Winston looked highly uncomfortable, shifting his weight and avoiding direct eye contact with my disgraced father, but he gave a tight, reluctant nod. I was willing to throw a modest bid to save his former pastor from total public humiliation, but only if the price was practically a steal. The sharp, commanding voice of the head auctioneer suddenly echoed through the sophisticated sound system, bringing the crowded room to an immediate hush. He officially announced the next highly anticipated property, describing the sprawling generational mansion located in the most exclusive elite neighborhood of Atlanta. He displayed stunning high-definition photos of the massive estate on the large digital screens at the front of the hall. Valerie let out a soft, miserable whimper at the sight of her beautiful lost kingdom. The auctioneer set the opening bid at $4 million, a fraction of the property's actual market value due to the aggressive nature of the foreclosure. Winston immediately raised his numbered paddle, placing the opening bid. 2 other local corporate developers quickly jumped into the fray, driving the price up to $4.5 million. Charles leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together in fervent, desperate prayer. Winston hesitated, then raised his paddle again, bidding exactly $5 million. The other 2 developers slowly lowered their paddles, shaking their heads. The profit margin was no longer viable for a quick flip. Valerie let out a massive, trembling sigh of profound relief. She reached out and grabbed Charles by his arm, a pathetic, desperate smile breaking across her exhausted face. They genuinely believed they had successfully manipulated their way out of total destruction. They actually thought they were going to miraculously waltz right back into their prestigious mansion and pretend this entire catastrophic ordeal was nothing but a minor temporary setback. The auctioneer raised his heavy wooden gavel, scanning the quiet room for any final challengers. He called out, going once, then going twice. I slowly stood up from my seat in the back row, stepping smoothly out of the dark shadows and directly into the bright illuminated center aisle of the auction hall. I raised my paddle high into the air, my voice cutting through the heavy silence with lethal absolute precision. I confidently called out a bid of $8 million, paid entirely in liquid cash. The entire auction hall collectively gasped, whipping their heads around to stare at me. Winston immediately dropped his paddle, completely unwilling to fight against a massive, unchallengeable cash offer. Charles and Valerie slowly turned around in their seats, the fragile, desperate hope instantly draining from their horrified faces as they locked eyes with me. The auctioneer aggressively slammed his heavy wooden gavel down onto the podium, officially declaring the property sold. I walked gracefully down the center aisle, signed the finalized legal paperwork right at the front desk, and smiled as the auctioneer handed me the heavy brass keys. I held the shiny brass keys firmly in my right hand, feeling the cold, heavy metal pressing into my palm. I slowly pivoted away from the wooden registration desk and walked deliberately toward the third row, where my terrified parents remained frozen in their seats. The surrounding crowd of wealthy investors and curious developers silently parted, giving me a wide, unobstructed path. Charles started shaking uncontrollably, his dark eyes wide with absolute dread as he watched me approach. Valerie covered her mouth with both of her trembling hands, quietly sobbing as she realized her very last chance at survival had just been entirely eradicated by the daughter she had ruthlessly discarded. I stopped directly in front of them, looking down at their pathetic, broken forms. I did not yell. I did not gloat. I simply raised my hand and dangled the brass keys right in front of my father's sweating face. The metallic jingling sound echoed sharply in the quiet space. Charles reached his hand out instinctively, a blind, desperate reflex, but I smoothly pulled the keys away before his fingertips could even brush against them. I smiled very coldly, letting the absolute finality of my ultimate victory wash completely over them. You can never return to my gorgeous luxury estate. You are permanently banished from my massive Atlanta property forever, and I will swiftly demand your immediate, forceful legal public arrest. The security guards stepped forward, placing their hands on my parents' trembling shoulders. Charles and Valerie were escorted out, their loud sobbing echoing down the marble hallway. I did not watch them leave. I turned around and walked out into the bright Atlanta afternoon, feeling liberated. The chains of their toxic elitism were broken. I held the shiny brass keys to the generational mansion tightly in my hand, but I had absolutely no intention of living inside that house. That sprawling estate was built on severe colorism, pretentious social climbing, and deep financial deception. It held no warm memories for me. I refused to sleep in the grand bedrooms where they had plotted to maintain their fragile empire at my expense. Instead of calling a moving company, I made a very different phone call. I hired the most efficient commercial construction crew in Georgia. 2 weeks later, heavy yellow bulldozers, towering cranes, and dump trucks rolled through the ornate front gates of the pristine Vance family estate. The wealthy neighbors peered through their expensive silk curtains in shock as construction vehicles tore up the manicured lawn. The crew did not hold back. They gutted the opulent grand ballroom where my mother had hosted her exclusionary high society banquets. They demolished the dark mahogany study where my father had arrogantly dismissed my entire existence. They tore out the imported Italian marble floors and ripped down the expensive crystal chandeliers. I stood on the dusty front porch, wearing a hard hat, watching the satisfying destruction of my parents' fake world. We knocked down the restrictive interior walls to create open learning spaces. We transformed the luxury garage into a state-of-the-art technology laboratory. We turned the oversized formal dining room into a sunlit art studio. The sprawling backyard pool was filled in and replaced with a lush community garden and an outdoor amphitheater. Within 3 months, the once oppressive Vance mansion had been completely reborn. It was no longer a monument to toxic generational wealth and fake politics. I officially named the new facility the Beatrice Center. It was a fully funded elite educational and arts foundation dedicated exclusively to empowering dark-skinned Black girls and marginalized youth from the surrounding underserved communities. These were the exact same brilliant girls my elitist parents had spent their entire pathetic lives looking down upon and trying to exclude from their social circles. The grand opening of the Beatrice Center was a highly publicized community event. Local news crews, prominent city officials, and hundreds of excited families gathered on the newly paved front courtyard. I stood at the wooden podium, looking out at the beautiful sea of dark, joyful faces. But the most important person in the entire crowd was standing right beside me. I had flown Aunt Beatrice down from Baltimore first class. She wore a vibrant yellow dress, her kind eyes shining with overwhelming pride. For 12 years, my parents had treated her modest home like a cheap dumping ground for their unwanted daughter. They had mocked her simple lifestyle and aggressively excluded her from prestigious family gatherings because she did not fit their fragile aesthetic. I turned to Aunt Beatrice, wrapping her in a tight embrace before handing her a heavy folder. I proudly announced to the cheering crowd that Aunt Beatrice was not just a guest of honor. She was the fully salaried executive director of the foundation. She wept tears of pure joy as she took the shiny brass keys to the very estate she had previously been banned from. She had finally taken her rightful place at the head of our ancestral home, replacing the toxic rot my parents cultivated for decades. My revenge was not just about destroying the people who hurt me. It was about aggressively uplifting the exact people they had maliciously tried to crush. Later that week, I was driving my sleek luxury sedan through a rundown section on the outskirts of the city. The neighborhood was grim, lined with cheap discount stores, broken streetlights, and fading billboards. I stopped my car at a long red light, casually glancing out my tinted passenger window. There was a dirty, grease-stained, cheap 24-hour discount diner sitting on the corner. The flickering neon sign buzzed loudly in the afternoon light. I narrowed my eyes, squinting through the smudged glass window of the depressing establishment. My heart skipped a sudden beat. Standing behind the sticky, incredibly dirty counter was a frail, exhausted man wearing a cheap, stained polyester uniform. It was Charles. The former proud patriarch of the Vance family was miserably punching numbers into a broken cash register, getting yelled at by an angry customer. He looked completely defeated, his shoulders slumped, and his face deeply lined with sheer exhaustion. I shifted my gaze toward the back of the dirty restaurant. A woman with unstyled, frizzy gray hair was aggressively scrubbing the sticky linoleum floor with a filthy, foul-smelling mop. She paused to wipe the sweat from her tired brow. It was Valerie, the former elite Atlanta socialite who had once thrown a $500 check into my soup because she felt my presence ruined. Her luxurious image was now scrubbing spilled soda off a cheap diner floor just to survive. She flinched as the angry customer at the counter shouted at Charles. Her shoulders tense with profound, inescapable humiliation. They had spent their entire lives desperately chasing the illusion of wealth, sacrificing their own daughter to maintain a fake glittering crown. Now their massive shadow debt and rampant embezzlement had stripped them of everything they valued. The light turned green. I did not roll down my window. I did not honk my horn. I simply smiled, a resonant sense of profound peace washing over me. I pressed my foot smoothly against the accelerator, driving my beautiful car forward, leaving the ghosts of my toxic past completely behind me in the dirty shadows. The tires of my vehicle hummed a steady rhythm against the pristine coastal highway asphalt as I left the grimy city limits entirely behind me. The heavy smog and depressing neon signs of the diner faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by the palm trees of my private coastline. They spent decades treating me like a stain on their curated family portrait, destroying my financial future to fund a fraudulent golden boy. The universe had simply handed them the exact life they had earned. I turned the steering wheel, guiding my car through the massive iron gates of the Vanguard Eco Resort. The security guards immediately stood tall, offering sharp nods of respect as I drove past the manicured botanical gardens. I parked in my designated spot and walked gracefully through the grand glass entrance. The luxurious lobby smelled of fresh orchids and sea salt, a striking contrast to the stale grease clinging to my parents in that diner. My general manager, Antoine, greeted me with a warm smile, handing me a financial report showing our profits had tripled this quarter. I thanked him and stepped into the private glass elevator, pressing the button for the top floor. The heavy oak doors of the presidential suite slid open to reveal my personal sanctuary. This was the exact same opulent room that Courtney had maliciously attempted to steal from me, using her white tears and her father's political threats. Now her father faced federal banking investigations, her husband sat in a county jail cell awaiting sentencing, and she was likely hiding in a guest bedroom at her parents' house, stripped of her fake billionaire status. I walked across the imported marble floors, dropping my leather handbag onto the expansive kitchen island. I reached for a crystal wine glass and opened a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, pouring the rich, dark red liquid perfectly. I carried the heavy crystal glass across the living room and pushed open the massive floor-to-ceiling sliding glass doors. The warm evening air wrapped around my shoulders as I stepped out onto the private balcony. The setting sun painted the horizon in brilliant strokes of deep violet and burning gold, reflecting off the calm ocean waves crashing gently against the private beach below. I rested my hands against the metal railing, taking a slow, deep breath of the crisp air. For the first time in 33 years, my chest felt completely light. I looked out over the $80 million property that I had built entirely from the ground up. I did not need a fraudulent loan from a shadow lender. I did not need to embezzle money from innocent community members. I certainly did not need to chase the validation of the Atlanta high society elite. I thought about those 12 long, sweltering summers I had spent banished to Baltimore. My parents shipped me away because my dark skin and quiet intelligence threatened their superficial colorist obsession with proximity to whiteness. They wanted to project a flawless, light-skinned, wealthy image for their social clubs. They firmly believed that sending me to Aunt Beatrice was a harsh punishment. They completely failed to realize that they were sending me to the only woman capable of teaching me how to survive their toxic cruelty. Aunt Beatrice had taught me the value of hard work, financial literacy, and unconditional love. While Julian was spoiled into becoming an arrogant, incompetent criminal, I was learning how to become a ruthless, untouchable queen. Blood does not automatically make someone your family. Sometimes blood just means you share a genetic connection with the very people trying to destroy your life. I spent my entire youth trying to seamlessly fit into a family tree that was fundamentally rotten at the core. The trunk was poisoned by deceit, the branches were heavy with massive debt, and the leaves were completely fake. You cannot heal a diseased tree by simply watering it with your own tears. You have to aggressively take an axe chop off the decaying branches and plant your own seeds in much healthier soil. My parents and my brother were a cancer to my peace. They were willing to let me go to federal prison to cover up Julian's massive embezzlement. They weaponized my race, trying to guilt me into protecting their fraudulent legacy in the name of Black excellence. But true excellence is not built on theft and lies. True excellence is what I had just created by turning their stolen mansion into a fully funded educational center for marginalized girls. True excellence is building an honest, sustainable empire that empowers the exact same people my parents had spent their entire lives viciously looking down upon. The sound of joyous, vibrant laughter suddenly drifted out through the open sliding glass doors behind me. I turned my head slightly, looking back into the spacious living room of the presidential suite. My Aunt Beatrice was sitting comfortably on the plush velvet sofa, wearing her beautiful new yellow dress, happily dealing a deck of playing cards. My head of security, Marcus, was sitting across from her off-duty and relaxed, laughing loudly at one of her sharp jokes. My loyal executive assistant and several genuine supportive friends were gathered around the kitchen island, eagerly unpacking massive containers of delicious steaming local seafood. This was my actual family. They were the people who respected my boundaries, celebrated my dark skin, and valued my brilliant mind long before I had millions of dollars in my bank account. They did not demand my resources or insult my presence. The sky slowly darkened into a deep, peaceful twilight, the stars beginning to shine brightly over my vast empire. I looked back at the ocean one final time, a wide, deeply satisfied smile spreading across my face. I raised my crystal glass to the setting sun, took a long celebratory sip of the rich red wine, and walked confidently back inside to my chosen family, completely and permanently free.